In this chapter, we're going to be creating the hood for the Corvette. I usually like to start with the hood when I'm making a car. It's just kind of easier than the rest of the car, and so it helps build some momentum, helps you get excited about the project. So first thing we'll do is load in a reference photo so we can actually see what we're dealing with. So I'm going to go to the top right corner of the 3D view, left click on the diagonal lines there and drag it to the left. That'll split the window for us. So now let's go into this menu on the right side and we'll change it to the UV image editor. Now click on open. Then let's go to the references folder and then to photo ref. And let's load in, let's see, what do we want? Front perspective 2. Yep, that's the one. Now I'll press Control and up while I'm hovered over that window and it'll full screen it for me. And let's see what we got here. So here's the hood we'll be creating. It's not going to be that difficult. We do have this vent area here to contend with. But what we're going to do is just model this all as one solid piece at first. And then we're going to deal with this area there. Alright, so we've got the reference photo loaded in. Let me press Control and up to get out of full screen. And we don't need this window for now, but we know that the reference image is there when we do need it. So I'll just left click on that border and drag it all the way to the right. And now we can start actually modeling this. Alright, we're going to start things off in top view now. So press numpad 7 if you haven't already to get into that view. And we're going to need to make sure that our 3D cursor is centered in the middle of the world. The reason for that is that we'll be mirroring the right side to the left side, so we need to make sure that anything we add is directly in the middle of the blueprints. So if you accidentally moved your cursor, press Shift and S and choose Cursor to Center. And now let's press Shift and A and add a mesh plane. Now let's go into edit mode by pressing Tab, and we really just need one vertex from this. So I'm going to press X and choose Edge Collapse. That's going to collapse all of the selected edges into one vertex, as you can see. And now I'm going to move this down. So I'll press G and then middle click as I drag down and it'll constrain it to the Y axis. And I'll drop it right there at the top of the hood. Now let me zoom in and we're going to move all of our vertices to the middle of these white lines. Like we're going to consistently stay in the middle of the white lines, not sometimes at the top of the white line or at the bottom. It actually does matter a little bit. So let me press G and Y. I'll move that to the middle of that line right there and left click to drop it. Alright, so that's it. That's the start of the project right there. One vertex. Just a few million more to go and we'll be done. Alright, so let's now, what we're going to do, the concept here is just to extrude this to each of the important parts of the blueprints. Then we'll go back and we'll add some more curvature if needed. So let's extrude it to this point right here. So I'll press the E key to extrude and I'll drop it right at that peak, right in the middle of the white line. And now we'll extrude it down to this point right there. So again, we're just extruding this down to all the major points on the blueprints, just to kind of block out the most major details. So I'll press E again, I'll extrude it up to that corner right there, and press E again, and we'll extrude it right there. And now I think we'll go all the way down. So I'll zoom out and press E and extrude it all the way down to the bottom corner. We're obviously going to need some more vertices on this long edge right there, but right now we're just blocking out the major details. Alright, so let's press E and we'll move that to that intersection right there. E again, we'll move it to this one. And then E again and we'll move it to this one. But you can see we can kind of move it past the halfway point. So I think it's time we add in the mirror modifier. That way when we move this toward the middle, it'll just lock into place right in the middle so we can't kind of overshoot it. So let me press G and I'll move that back to there. And let's go over to the modifiers, click on Add Modifier, and add in a mirror modifier. And you can see when I move this vertex, you can see the line on the other side. However, we can still go past the middle. We're going to enable the option called clipping. Now if I press G and move it toward the middle, when it gets actually to the middle, or rather where the object's origin point is, it will lock into place right there. That's why it was important to make sure we added the plane object in the middle of the blueprints. Alright, so let's move that vertex to the bottom point of the hood right there. And this is what we've got so far. And now we're going to make sure that these vertices are also aligned in front view and side view. So let's press numpad 1 for front view. And let's move these vertices up to meet up with the hood. So I'll press G and then Z, moves it straight up on the Z axis, right to the hood right there. Now what we're going to do is just move all these vertices to match up on the parts of the hood that they're supposed to be at. So let me actually rotate the view a little bit, and I'll select the back vertex there, which is one toward the windshield, then I'll press numpad 1 again for front view. And then I'll press G and then Z and move it straight up to right in the middle of the white line right there. Now let's select the one that's connected to it. Then press G and Z and move that up. And now we're basically just going to be tracing. We're going to take all these vertices, move them straight up on the Z axis, right into the middle of the white lines. And we kind of can't really see where this goes. It kind of goes behind part of the car, but we're just going to follow along with the white line right there. So, I mean, somewhere around there is fine. And this, let's see, let me press numpad 7. That's still toward the top of the hood. So let me press numpad 1 again. I'll press G and Z and move it up, basically to the same height as the other vertex, maybe a little bit lower. Let me select that vertex. I'll move it down to that corner there. And this one, I'll move that down. Let's move that one up. And this one up a little bit. All right, that's looking pretty cool. Now let's press numpad 3 for side view. And I don't really think we're going to have to do much in side view. I'm just making sure nothing looks like severely out of place. Everything looks fine. It's a little bit off there, but it doesn't really matter. These blueprints aren't 100% aligned with each other. This vertex here, I think it's the second one down. I'm going to move that down a little bit just because it's going straight there and then all of a sudden going down. Although I know we're going to have some curvature here. So you know what? Let me leave that as it is right now. That's fine. All right, now we've got the basic outline of the main details made. Now we're going to add some extra vertices like right here in order to round that part off. And a few right down here, and we're going to round that off a little bit as well. So let's start up at the top right here. I want to add one vertex in the middle of this, so I'll press Ctrl and R, which is the knife cut tool or the loop cut tool. So press Ctrl and R and you'll see a little purple dot highlighted in the middle. Left click and we get ourselves a new vertex. So I'm going to press G and move that down to the middle of the white line right there. And since we added a vertex there, we're going to need to add a counterpart down here since we're going to be connecting all of the top vertices to the bottom vertices. So we'll need to make sure we have the same amount. So let me go down here. I'll do the same thing. I'll press Ctrl and R in the middle of it, left click, and then move that down into the middle of the white line. And now let's make sure that they're aligned in front view as well. So I'll press numpad 1. And we'll start with the top vertex right here. I'll just press G and then Z, move that up into the middle of the line. And we'll go down to the bottom one, and that looks like it's already in place, so we're good to go. All right, now let's press numpad 7 for top view. Now I'm going to add, we have this vertex here at the bottom of that line right there, which is a crease. And that goes all the way up here where we don't have a vertex. So let's add one there. I'll press Ctrl and R in the middle of that edge and left click for our vertex. Now instead of just pressing G to freehand move it over, what I'll do is I'll keep it along this, I'll use this edge as the path by pressing G once and then twice. And that'll just do something called vertex slide, which means it'll move the vertex along the edge it's already connected to. So I just move that into place right there. And let's press numpad 1 for front view, and we'll make sure it's in place here too. So I'll just move that up a tiny bit. All right, cool. And let's press numpad 7 again. And still dealing with the top up here, let's add 2 vertices here. So I'll press Ctrl and R until I have one vertex there, and then I'll scroll up on the mouse wheel until I have 2. And you can see how many knife cuts you have by looking at the bottom left corner of the 3D view. And you can also type a number in and press enter. So once you have 2 cuts, left click, and let's just press G and move them down and into place. Let's move each vertex into the middle of that line. All right, cool. And let's make sure they're good in front view. So I'll press numpad 1. I'll zoom in, I'll press G and then Z, move that down on the Z axis into place, and this one as well. Cool, cool, cool. And we're going to need 2 more vertices in between them as well. So let's press numpad 7 for top view, because these 2 vertices there are going to have 2 vertices down here to connect to. So let's go down here, and I'll press Ctrl and R, and again I'll scroll up on the mouse wheel until I have 2 cuts. Then I'll left click. And I'll press G. I'm just going to press the up arrow on the keyboard to move them up in tiny increments like that. And I need to move this one down just a touch. All right, now let's press numpad 1 for front view, and let's get these into place. So I'll press G and then Z, move that down to there, and this one as well. However, when we add a subsurf modifier, this area is going to be smoothed a little bit, so it's going to bring the line up just a smidge. So what I'm going to do to compensate for that is just move this vertex a little bit lower. And this one as well. And that should do the trick. That should give us a nice dip right there. Now I'll press numpad 7 to go into top view, make sure I didn't move things out of place too much. And I'll move them around so that they're centered in a line. All right, cool. So all of our vertices at the top now have counterparts at the bottom to connect to. And now what we're going to do is we're going to join this vertex and that one, and then we're going to add just curvature from side view. Then we'll be extruding all those edges down to the right to connect to the right side of this, and then we'll be done with the base object. Actually, instead of starting with these two, I think we'll start with the crease over here. So let me select that vertex, and then I'll hold Shift and select that one, and then I'll press F to create an edge between them. Now we're going to add a bunch of vertices in the middle of that. We'll start off with one up toward the top here that's eventually going to connect to that one there. So let me press Ctrl and R over that line and left click to add that vertex. Then I'll press G twice and I'll slide it up toward the top. I'm going to slide it up to be the same distance away from that as these two are. So let me slide that up a little bit further, and that looks fine. Eventually that's going to connect to that one over there. All right, let's add a bunch of vertices in the middle of this now. I'll press Ctrl and R and then scroll up on the mouse until I have, let's go with 8 cuts, then left click. Now we just need to move these to the right to join up with the blueprint lines. So I'll select that vertex, press G, and middle click that drag to the right to lock it to the x-axis, and I'll drop it in the middle of the line like that. And we'll do that all the way up the line. Now let's press numpad 1 for front view, and we'll do the same thing in this view. We'll move all of these up on the z-axis by selecting one, press G and then Z, and move it up right on top of the line like that. So now press numpad 7 for top view. Let's zoom out a little bit. Now what we're going to do is take all those new vertices and we're going to extrude them to the right to meet up with this crease right there. So I'm going to press the B key for border select and left click and drag over all those vertices. Now let's press E to extrude it and middle click Z drag to the right to lock it to the x-axis, and we'll drop it right about there, kind of centered over that crease line. Now let's completely flatten this. So I'll press S and then X to scale it on the x-axis, hold Control for incremental scaling and scale it all the way down to 0, and then left click. Now we still need to slant this to match the angle of the crease there. So I'm going to press Control, Alt, Shift, and S for the shear tool, and we'll slant that to the same angle as the blueprints. All right, that looks good. Now let's press G and press the right arrow a couple of times until it's right on top of those blueprint lines, and press Enter. All right, let's go into front view by pressing numpad 1. Let's see what we got so far. So we're going to need to move all of these down, so let's do that first. Let me scroll up toward the top here. I want these two vertices to be the same distance away as these two. So I'm going to press G and then Z and move that down to about right there. I'll move everything to the left a little bit as well. So I'll just press G, I'll move that to about right there. That looks good. I'm kind of just using this crease line as a guide right now. We'll see how things go. All right, everything's looking good so far. Now what we need to do is have this edge have the same angle as this edge here, because this is where things start to kind of go downward. They start to dip inward. However, as we travel further up the hood, that dip is a little less, so it has more of a gradual decline as it reaches the bottom of the hood. So in order to make that perfectly without too much hassle, here's what we're going to do. We're going to scroll up to the top vertex there, hold Shift and right click on it to deselect it, and then right click on it again while holding Shift and it will reselect it. But as you can see, it's highlighted now, and that's what we need. So what we're going to do is we're going to scale all these vertices away from that vertex, and it's going to give us that gradual decline we want. So let's go into the menu in the header right here and select Active Element. That allows us to rotate or scale around our active selection, which is that vertex up there. So now let's press S to scale it, and you can see it's scaling away from that vertex. And then press the Z key to scale it just on the Z axis. And let's scale it down to about right there. And that gives us the same angle for this edge as we see down here. Now let's press numpad 7 for top view. And we're going to do the same thing from this view. And the reason we're doing that is because, again, we need to match up to this angle down here. So let me zoom out a little bit, and I'll press Control and up for full screen. And now let's press S and then Y to scale it on the Y-axis toward that vertex And I'll just use the up arrow until I have the right amount of angle at the bottom. So right about there looks good, and I'll press enter. All right, cool. So I think that looks pretty good. Let me press Z for or for shaded view, make sure everything looks good. All right, let's zoom out a little bit, and I'll hold Alt and right click on that edge right there, and it'll select the whole edge loop for me. Make sure you don't select the top and bottom vertices. And now let's extrude this to the left by pressing E and middle click and drag all the way to the center until they merge, and then left click. Now we're going to need to match up the angles at the top and the bottom again, so let's press G and simply move that down until the angle up there looks right. And now we need to match up the angles at the bottom. We're going to do that by scaling away from the top vertex. So let's hold Shift, right click on that top vertex, and then right click on it again so that it's highlighted. And let's zoom in down here. And now let's just press S and then Y. It'll scale away from that active selection, and we'll scale it down to about right there. Looks good. Now let's go into front view by pressing, actually let's go into side view by pressing numpad 3. Let's press G and then Z and move that up to about right there. We're going to be aligning it with the blueprint lines down there. And let's press numpad 1 for front view. So the bottom is good to go, but we need to scale the top up a little bit because there's too much of a gap right here. And it should be more like the tiny gap right over here. So let's hold Shift and right click on that vertex and do it again so it's highlighted. Then press S and then Z. Scale it away until there's only a tiny gap between the two vertices at the top, right there. That looks more like the gap over there. Alright, that should be good to go. Let me go into side view and double check. It's not really lining up with the blueprints there, but again, don't worry about that. That whole section is going to be kind of tweaked later. We're just making one solid hood piece, and then we're going to deal with all that. Alright, now what are we going to do? Now what are we going to do? Now let's add an edge loop right through here. So I'll press Ctrl and R to add an edge loop, left click, and then right click to keep it in place. And let's zoom in up here, and just simply press G, and then press the up arrow a few times until that gap is the same as the others. Right there, looks good. And it looks like everything else is actually good to go on that one. So let me go into top view by pressing numpad 7. And let's face up those areas up there. Actually, first let's select that vertex, press G twice and slide it down just a touch to match up with the curve up there. And then let's select these 4 vertices and press F, then select those 2, press F 2 more times down the line. And we'll do the same thing down here. Face that up, and then face them up. Alright, we're getting somewhere. We are getting somewhere. Now let's add some vertices on the right side edge here. You'll remember we added 1 vertex at the top there, and then 8 right there. So we need to add 8 more over here so that they can all meet up. So let's press Ctrl and R until that purple dot is highlighted there. Then scroll up on the mouse wheel until we have 8 cuts. Then left click. And what we'll do now is just match these up to the blueprints in top view and then front view. So let's select 1 vertex at a time. Press G and then X. Slide it right over the blueprint line. And we'll do the same thing down the line. And now let's go into front view by pressing numpad 1. And we'll just move all of these up on the Z axis. So starting from there, I'll press G and then Z. Move it right on top of the line like that. And we'll do that for the rest of these as well. Alright, let me zoom out. Now what we'll do is start extruding these vertices to the right. So right now we have 3 vertices up there, but only 2 down there. I didn't add enough earlier on, so we'll do that now by pressing numpad 1 for front view. And with that vertex selected, I'll press G and I'll move it to the left a little bit like that. And I'll select that one and press G and I'll move it to the left and down a little bit like that. Now we'll just add one in here. So I'll press Ctrl and R and left click in there. And I'll move that down just a tiny bit. Alright, so we got the vertices we need now. And let's press numpad 7 for top view. And I'll hold Alt and right click on that edge loop right there. And let's deselect the top by holding Shift and right clicking on it and do the same thing with the bottom. Now let's press E and middle click as we drag to the right and we'll drop it right about there. And now hold Shift and right click on that vertex there. And now we can scale toward that vertex on the X axis to create a nice straight line of edges. So let's press S and then X and hold Control and scale it down to that vertex down to 0 and then left click. Alright, now we need to shear these vertices to meet up with this vertex down there. So let's press Control, Alt, Shift, and S, and hold Shift for smaller increment scaling or shearing, and shear that until it looks like it's going to connect to the bottom vertex perfectly. And then I'll left click there. Let's see how that did. So I'll select these 4 vertices and press F, and then I'll select those 4 and press F. So it looks like there's a slight angle down there. I didn't shear it quite enough. So let me hold Alt and right click on that. Then I'll hold Shift and right click on the top and bottom vertices to deselect them. And now we're going to need to shear this a little bit more. So let me hold Shift again and right click on the top vertex to make it active. And let me zoom in down here. Then I'll press Control, Alt, Shift, and S to shear it. And again, I'll hold Shift for small shearing or for small increment shearing. And then we'll slant it just a little bit more so that it's nice and perfect like that. And while we're at it, let's fix up these vertices too. They moved out of place when we were moving them around earlier. So I'll press G and Y to move that down. And same thing with this. Let's move that down a little bit more too. Alright, cool. So we got that line in place. However, you can see that our curvature is going up and it starts going straight across. We need to match up these vertices to meet up with these over here. So what we'll do first is just select these 4 vertices and press F. Then select those 2 and press F all the way up to there. Now we see where we need to move these vertices in order to make that curvature continue. Now let's hold Alt and right click on that edge right there, and we'll select that whole edge loop without the top and bottom selected. And now let's press numpad 1 for front view. And we're going to need to move this down to create the dipped area. So let me zoom in, then I'll press G and then Z. Move it down so the spacing at the top 2 vertices is the same as all the others. So right about there. So you can see the spacing is the same all the way down here. That looks good, except it gets a little bit too steep at the bottom there. So let's select the top vertex. So I'm going to hold Shift, right click on that, and then do it again to make it an active selection. Then I'll press numpad 1 for front view, and then press S to scale it, and then Z to scale it up until the angle at the bottom looks correct. So that amount of dip right there looks absolutely correct. So now let's go into top view by pressing numpad 7. We still have to take care of the angling right here, or the curvature. So with that top vertex still the active selection, what I'm going to do is press S and then Y to scale on the Y-axis toward that vertex. And I'll just press the up arrow until the bottom set of edges has the right curvature, just like that. Now I'll hold Shift and I'll deselect that, and I'll worry about this one now. So again, I'll press S and then Y, then press the up arrow a couple of times until that curvature is correct, and then press Enter. And I'll do the same thing all the way up the line. Now what we're going to do is add 2 edge loops through here to meet up with the top 2 vertices and bottom 2. So let's press Control and R to add a loop cut. And we have a vertical loop cut there highlighted, but let's scroll up on the mouse until we have 2 cuts, then left click, and then right click to keep them in place. Now let's match up with the curvature at the top. So I'll just press G and then Y, move them straight down until we have a similar curvature, just like that. And of course that kind of screws up our curvature here, toward the bottom especially. So let me go up and let's see where that starts to fail. I guess right about here. So I'm going to select those 2 vertices. I'll press G twice and slide them up just a little bit to make sure that this curvature is nice and smooth throughout. And we'll do the same thing with these 2. And as we go further down, we'll need to move them just a little bit further up to really correct these curves. I think this might be a little bit overkill, but as long as you make sure your curvatures of all your edge loops look good in each view, you're going to end up with a good result. Alright, so all those curves look good from this view. Now let's go into front view and see the damage. So I'll press numpad 1 for front view, and looks like we're going to get away with not having to do too much alteration to this. We're just going to have to take these 2 edge loops and move them down a little bit. So let me hold Alt and right click on that edge loop to select it. Then I'll hold Alt and Shift and right click on that edge to select that edge loop. Now let's press G and then Z. We're going to move it down just a little bit. We want the spacing right here to be consistent all the way down. So let me move it up on the Z-axis a little bit, and that looks good. I'm going to need to do the same thing with this edge loop. So let me hold Alt and right click on that edge loop to just select that. Then I'll press G and Z and move that up to right there. Alright, that looks good. So it's not looking fantastic at the bottom. This curvature here is not matching up with this curvature there. But not a problem. We'll do what we've been doing. Let's hold Alt and right click on that edge loop to select it. I'll rotate the view, and then hold shift and right click on that edge or that vertex to deselect it, then right click on it again to select it and make it active. Now let's go into front view by pressing numpad 1, and we'll simply press S and then Z, scale it away from the active selection until it matches up with the curvature toward the bottom. Just like that. Looks good. Let me select these 4 vertices and press F. Make sure everything's still looking good, and it is. So let's do the same thing with this edge loop over here. I'll hold Alt and right click on it, then hold Shift and right click on that vertex twice to make it active. Then let's go back into front view and press S and then Z. Scale that down to have the right curvature, just like that. All right, cool. Now let's select those 2 vertices and press F down the line. And these curves are looking sweet. These curves horizontal are looking sweet. Let's go into top view by pressing numpad 7. Yep, all these are looking sweet too. We just need to face up this gap up here. So I'll select those 2 vertices, press F down the line, and I think we are done the base shape for the hood. All right, now let's add a subsurf modifier to this to start making it nice and curvy, and then add a few extra edge loops to emphasize things like the creases. So let me press Control and the up arrow to get out of full screen. And over in the modifier buttons, I'll click on Add Modifier and add in a subsurf modifier. Let me rotate the view a little bit. So now we're going to have to add a couple of extra edge loops, but first let's change the subdivision levels up to 2 so things are a little smoother. And let me press Tab to get out of edit mode, and let's take care of the faceted look by smooth shading it. So I'll press the T key for the left side toolbar and click on smooth shading. Let's press T again to get rid of that, and press Tab to go back into edit mode. And now let's add in some edge loops. So we'll start off with this crease right here. So I'm going to hold Alt and right click on that to select it, and then I'll press the T key for the left side toolbar. We're going to need the operator menu down here. So let me click on that edge there and I'll drag that up so we have more room. Now I'll press Control and B to bevel that edge, and I'll bevel it to about right there and then left click. And now we have some options over here for the bevel tool. Let's increase the number of segments to 2. That way we get 1 edge loop surrounding our original edge loop on each side. And that should really sharpen up that crease and make it stand out. And let's see, the amount is 0.003. All right, I mean, that looks good, I think. It might be a little bit too sharp, in fact. Let me click on that field. Let's change it to, well, it was a little less than 0.003, so let's change it to exactly 0.003. There we go. Just widened it just a little bit. I don't want the creases to be too sharp. All right, now let's hold Alt and right click on that edge loop, and we'll do the same thing. Press Control and B, and it should keep the original value. So then just press Enter. And now this is beveled to the same width as this one over here. Now let's add one down the middle as well. So I'll press Control and R to add an edge loop, left click, and then I'll press the E key for alignment, and then I'll align it with the left side. You can see the red square right to left of my cursor indicates which side we are aligning with. To switch sides, you can simply press the F key, and it will align it with either side. So let me just bring that over there and drop it right about there. Let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, and you can see our creases. Let's change the material of this so we can actually see the creases a lot better. I'll press the N key for the right side toolbar. Scroll down to the bottom, well, not the bottom, right here in the shading panel. I'll click on Matte Cap, which enables preview materials, and click on that material there, and it gives you a list of all the preview materials we can use. I typically like modeling with this material, but when I'm really looking for flaws and curvatures, I'll use this one. So let's turn this one on for right now, just so we can really see all of our curves and creases stand out. So now I'll press the N key to get rid of that, and I'll press the T key as well to get rid of that. And let's rotate this around and see how it looks. You can see our reflections are passing through the curvature very smoothly. There's no kinks, there's no waviness, except of course, these 3 creases we got going on. But that's what we're looking for, and that's why I use this matte cap as well. It's very, very unforgiving. If there's any flaw whatsoever, it really stands out with this matte cap. So now that we've got the general hood area finished, let me give you a more broad idea of what we're going to be doing for this and the rest of the car. So if I go into top view, you'll see that we have to cut out a hole like this right there. The only problem is if we do that with a subsurfed mesh, then it's always going to cause some problems, especially around the corners where you have more congested geometry and it just screws up the curvature. And let me demonstrate that for you real quick. You don't have to follow along here. So let me duplicate that and right click to keep it in place. Let me increase the subdivision levels on this to 4. This is going to be our guide mesh, is what I call them. This is what we're going to be shrink wrapping all of our other panels on top of in order to preserve a perfect curvature. So let me press H to hide that. This is going to be the actual mesh that we cut the details out of and that we shrink wrap on top of our guide mesh. So let's just say, for example, I wanted to cut a square hole out of that area there. So it's rounded on the corners, so naturally I'd add some extra geometry by the corners to square them off. The only problem is, as I mentioned, this is going to screw up the curvature. You can see how it's all dented now. Now there are ways to get around that by moving some vertices around and trying your best to maintain a perfect curvature, but that's annoying and time consuming. The easy way around that is to shrink wrap this on top of the mesh that we hid. So you can see that helps preserve the perfect curvature on the surface, but still gives us our square cutout because it takes all of this subsurf geometry and it shrink wraps it on top of our guide mesh here. And just like I mentioned in the intro chapter on the shrink wrap modifier, it's important that your guide mesh be at least 2 levels of subdivisions above your base mesh that you shrink wrap on top of it. All right, so that is, let me undo all that real quick. Get back to where I started, right? Let me delete one of them. Okay, we're back. Now let me show you the car reference picture real quick. So basically what I just showed you for the hood, we're going to be doing for the whole car where we need to. And we're also going to be modeling the whole car as one solid piece without all of these panel separations. That makes sure that the reflections are going to pass from one panel to the other seamlessly. All right, so let's do one last thing before calling this chapter complete. Let me press the N key for the right side toolbar, and let's change the matte cap over to this more dull reflective silver. And then press N to get rid of that toolbar. So the red matte cap's a little bit hard on the eyes. I don't want to model like that all the time, but we'll switch back to that when we want to look for every single solitary flaw our model might have. But we'll primarily be using this to model with because it looks cool and it's easier on the eyes. And yeah, that's it. So that'll do it for this chapter. And in the next chapter, we'll be working on creating the side fender.